Okay, I'm in my copy of my book. I'm on page 20. 1, 2, 3, fourth paragraph. Mr. Hancock was comfortably seated in the one armchair which was kept in the shop for patrons. When I'm master, thought Johnny, there are going to be 2 armchairs, and I'll sit in one. Unobtrusively, Johnny got his notebook and pencil. Dub and Dusty were paralyzed into complete inaction. "Do something," Johnny muttered to them, determined his master's shop should look busy. Dusty could not take his eyes off the green velvet coat, sprigged white waistcoat, silver buttons and buckles on the great man, but he picked up a soldering iron and nervously dropped it. "And to be done next Monday, a week from today," Mr. Hancock was saying. "I want it as a birthday present to my venerable Aunt Lydia Hancock. This is the creamer of the set. Only this morning a clumsy maid melted the sugar basin. I want you to make me a new one, and I want it about so high, so broad." Johnny glanced at the delicate lace-ruffled gesturing hands, guessed the inches, and wrote it down. Mr. Lapham was looking down at his own gnarled fingers. He nodded, and said nothing. He did not even glance at the cream pitcher as Mr. Hancock set it down on a workbench. Johnny's hard, delicate hands, so curiously strong and mature for his age, reached quickly to touch the beautiful thing. It was almost as much by touch as by sight he judged fine silver. It was indeed old-fashioned, more elaborate than the present mold. The garlands on it were rounded out in reposy work. Mr. Lapham would have to do the reposing. Johnny hadn't been taught that. He looked at the handle. A sugar basin would have to have 2 such handles, and they would be larger than the one on the creamer. He'd shape it in wax, make a mold. He'd cast hundreds of small things since he had gone to work for Mr. Lapham, but nothing so intricate and beautiful as the woman with folded wings whose body formed the handle. He thought he had never seen anything quite so enchanting as this picture. It must have been the work of one of the great smiths of 40 or 50 years ago. Although he had not intended to address Mr. Hancock, he had said, before he thought, "John Cooney, sir?" Mr. Hancock turned to him. He had a handsome face, a little worn as though either his health was bad or he did not sleep well. "Look at the mark, boy." Johnny turned it over, expecting to see the familiar rabbit of the great Mr. Cooney. Instead, there was a pellet and an L, and a pellet. "Your master made that creamer? 40 years ago?" "He made the entire set." "You made it?" He had never guessed there had been a time when Mr. Lapham could do such beautiful work. At last Mr. Lapham raised his protuberant eyes. "I remember when your uncle, Mr. Thomas Hancock, sir, ordered that set. 'Make it big and make it handsome,' he said. 'Bigger and handsomer than anything in Boston. As big and handsome as my lady is. Make it as rich as I am.'" John Hancock laughed. "That is just the way my uncle used to talk." He was so sure of his own good breeding, he could laugh affectionately at the rich, quick vulgarities of the uncle who had adopted him, and from whom he had inherited his fortune. He stood up, a tall, slender man, who stooped as he stood and walked. The fine clothes seemed a little pathetic. He had a soft voice, and low. "But you have not as yet said whether or not you can make my sugar basin for me, and have it done by Monday next. Of course I thought first of you, because you made the original. But there are other silversmiths. Perhaps you would rather not undertake." Mr. Lapham was in the study. "I've got the time, the materials, and the boys to help. I can get right at it. But honestly, sir, I don't know. Perhaps I haven't got the skill any more. I've not done anything so fine for 30 years. I'm not what I used to be." And although neither of the 2 men could see the door leading from the hall to the shop, Johnny could. There was Mrs. Lapham in her morning apron, her face purple with excitement, and all 4 girls crowded about her, listening, gesturing at Johnny. "Say yes." All 5 faces, big and little, mouthed at him. "Yes, yes, yes." So they had forgotten their morning prayers, had they? Wanted him to take charge. "We can do it, Mr. Hancock." "Bless me. exclaimed the gentleman not accustomed to apprentices who settled matters while their masters pondered. Yes, sir, and you shall have it delivered at your own house a week from today, 7 o'clock Monday morning, and it's going to be just exactly right. Mr. Lapham looked at Johnny gratefully. Certainly, sir. I'm humbly grateful for your august patronage. He was not a proud man. He was relieved that Johnny had stepped in and settled matters. Mr. Hancock bowed and turned to go. But none of the boys thought to run ahead and open the door for him, so Mrs. Lapham, apron and all, barged in, her red arms bare to the elbow, her felt slippers flapping at her bare heels, and overdid the curtsies for them all. Hardly was the door closed than there was a rap on it. Little Jehu came mincing in, a glitter of bright colors. He solemnly laid 3 pieces of silver on the nearest bench and recited his piece. My master, Mr. John Hancock, Esquire, bids me leave these coins, one for each of the poor work-boys, hoping they will drink his health and be diligent at their benches. Then he was gone. Hoping they will vote for him when they are grown up and have enough property. Don't you ever vote for Mr. Hancock, sir? Asked Johnny. I never do. I don't hold much with these fellows that are always trying to stir up trouble between us and England. Maybe English rule ain't always perfect, but it's good enough for me. Fellows like Mr. Hancock and Sam Adams, calling themselves patriots and talking too much, not reading God's word like their parents did, which tells us to be humble. But he's my landlord, and I don't say much. Johnny was not listening. He sat with the pitcher in his hand. To think the poor, humble old fellow once had been able to make things like that. Well, he was going to turn the trick again before he died, even if Johnny had to stand over him and make him. The sun stood directly overhead, pressing its heat down upon the town as though it held an enormous brass basin. There was not wind enough to take a catboat from Hancock's Wharf to Noddle Island, and the Lapham shop windows and doors were left open to catch what breeze might come up the wharf, but there wasn't any breeze. Old Mr. Lapham had worked well in the morning. He said if Johnny could do the handles, he himself could get the basin done in time. But after dinner, he had gone down to the old willow behind the coal house, put a basket over his head, and gone to sleep. Dumb and Dusty had therefore left to go swimming. Johnny was making out of wax an exact replica of the pitcher handle, only enlarging it. He tried again and again, never quite satisfied with his work, but confident that he could do it. It was long past dinner hour when he crossed the entry into the kitchen. The fire was out, the table cleared except for his place. Scylla had evidently been left to wait on him whenever he felt like eating. The success of Mr. Hancock's order was so dependent upon him. No one would scold him today because he chose to be an hour late. Johnny took a seat, and Scylla put down the slate she had been drawing on. She gave him a piece of cold meat pie, a flat loaf of rye bread, dried apples, and ran down cellar to fetch him a flagon of cold ale. He drank the ale, and then more leisurely began on the pie. With hardly a word, Scylla went back to the settle where Asana was sprawled and picked up her slate. She drew very well. It would be just about nothing, Johnny thought, to teach that girl to write. She's doing it for you, Johnny, Asana said at last. What are you doing for me, Syl? She's designing you a beautiful mark, so when you are man-grown and master-smith, you can stamp your silver with it. I have 5 more years to go. No matter how good my work may be, I have to mark it with your grandpa's, old Pellets and L's. Johnny's forgotten morning prayers and all those wonderful, humble people, said Scylla. Look, I've got your J and T, sort of entwined. Too hard to read. Then, too, he could not imagine why he came out with the secret. When I'm master-smith, I'm going to use all 3 of my initials. All 3? Neither of the girls had ever heard of a poor working boy with 3 names. You're not making up? Scylla asked almost respectfully. I heard tell of folks with 3 names, but I never saw one before. Look at me, my girl. He got up to go back to the shop. Wait, Johnny. What is that middle name? It begins with L. As far as you are concerned, it ends with L too. I bet it's something so awful you're ashamed of it, like ladybug or leapfrog. I bet it's lamentable. Johnny grinned, untempted by her insults. In the shop, it was so hot he could not handle the wax. The solitude in which he worked depressed him a little. For the first time, he was afraid he could not get the handles right. All the shops had stopped work because of the heat. He could hear the other boys running and splashing, diving off the wharf into the cold water. He locked the shop. Now even Mr. Lapham would have to ask him if he wanted to get in, and he ran off to swim. Later after sunset, he could get on with the model, even if he had to work by lamplight.